Hello, I am Ron Reelsmith, President of the Sarnia Historical Society. I thank Bob McCarthy for putting this project together, and I am honored to be presenting the story to you today. I work for the Sarnia Police Service, and am 33 years old. I have a child to be born this year, and to be honest, life couldn't be better. I say this to you because 81 years ago, a 33-year-old police officer, who was also in his prime, was lost to us. His name is Jack Lewis. Jack Lewis might not be a name that stands out to you, as you are probably more aware of the man who shot and killed him. Out of respect for Jack Lewis and his family, his murderer shall not be named here. A lot of time and effort has gone into telling the story surrounding the circumstances of Jack's death. National political scandal, political incompetence, bank robberies, fast cars, deceit, and a shootout. It all makes for a great story, book, and movie. But what about the Lewis family? What about Jack? A man in his prime, 33 years old, 2 children and a wife. A man who got up every day and went to work, served and protected his community. Jack's story has been lost in time. Recently, the Lewis family donated materials to the Sarnia Police Service and Sarnia Historical Society that documents the life, the shooting, tragic death, funeral, and events that came afterwards. In looking through these documents, we have worked to piece together a glimpse of the man who died while protecting his community. His wife was present. Constable Lewis died in the presence of his wife in the Sarnia General Hospital, while Mrs. Lewis anxiously stood by the bed as doctors and nurses vainly struggled to stem the loss of blood, which gradually weakened him. Constable Lewis was conscious at moments and appeared to recognize his wife. In a voice scarcely audible at times, the valiant officer spoke his last. His final words were, "Vera, I'm going fast. I'll soon be with Mr. Rhodes." That Constable Lewis had a premonition of his impending death was apparent in his spoken words. Mr. Rhodes referred to was Reverend A.H. Rhodes, who died suddenly on Tuesday evening and whose funeral Constable Lewis attended at St. Paul's Anglican Church on Friday afternoon. The officer was a friend of the Point Edward rector for many years when the latter was in charge of Trinity and St. John's in the Wilderness churches. Sarnia Constable gets Bravery Award. The Sarnia Police Commission at a meeting recently recommended Constable John Lewis of the City Police Force for a merit mark and a bonus of $25 in recognition for the smartness in effecting single-handed an arrest of 2 men who, armed with an iron bar, were attempting to enter a store on Maxwell Street early on the morning of August 17. The recommendation was made by Chief Constable W.J. Lannon, and the commissioners heartily concurred. Not in the century of its existence that Sarnia will shortly celebrate has the city seen a more moving, impressive spectacle than that of the funeral of Constable John Lewis, victim of bandits, which was held yesterday afternoon from the Parker Street United Church to Blackwell Cemetery. It was possibly the largest funeral ever held in the city, the attendance being estimated at 2,500 people. A popular officer. Constable John Lewis was regarded as one of the most efficient and popular members of the Sarnia Police Department. Police officers in the station, while talking with reporters, had nothing but praise for the slain officer. There was never a more conscientious man on the force than John Lewis, said Sergeant John Kramer. The young officer, well known throughout the city and district, had many marks of merit to his credit. He had been on the Sarnia Police Force 7 years, having started on April 1st, 1929. We are proud. Jack Lewis was one of our best. Magistrate C.S. Woodrow, the Board of Police Commissioners, said, as he was given the sorrowful news at the police station early Saturday evening. We have seen him always ready to do his duty, and no matter what the odds against him, he was always ready to carry out his instructions, the magistrate said. The city owes a debt of gratitude to Patrol Sergeant Smith and Detective McGurr for their heroism shown in the gun battle. All Sarnia is proud of them. A Chief's Tribute. Chief Lannon glances away as the tunic is inspected. He bites his lip when someone says, "Chief, perhaps you might say something." He stares out the window, expressionless, replying slowly. Lewis was an unassuming chap, of quiet demeanor, but he was always about his business, observant, alert, and fearless. A father's praise. My boy, John, everyone in Sarnia and elsewhere called him Jack, was a manly fellow, George Lewis said. At a time like this, you have to keep control. The mother is all broken up. Poor woman, I feel sorry for her. John. His name, I want to tell you, was George Edward John. Though most folk called him Jack, he was our eldest boy, born 33 years ago, the day before Christmas. He farmed with me, sold garden stuff in Sarnia. That's how the folks knew him so well. 7 years ago, the 1st of April, he joined the police here. Farming didn't pay well, even though he had his own place then. $4 a day looks big at times, you know. But it wasn't exactly the money end. John was always venturesome as a child, though I'm telling you, he wasn't one who tried to be sensational or show off. If he did climb to the top of the barn roof as a kid, he never bellowed when he got there, no. Well, about 10 years ago we got married, to a fine girl too. Her name was Vera May Hardick. Her mother's dead, but her father, Richard is his name, lives at Blackwell. That's in Sarnia Township. They had their own place near Sarnia here. Then John joined the city police. The provincials, you know, they put in a word for him. George Lewis blinked his eyes. I'm worried about the mother. She's taking it hard, you know. We are Welsh folk, though my father and grandfather were born here in Canada. You know, their parents went over to Ireland during the rebellion. I forget which one you call it. A long time ago. John was venturesome, as I was saying. But my boy John wouldn't harm a fly. But he was up and doing if he knew things were wrong. I think he caught a couple of fellows single-handedly breaking into a store not so long ago. The only part John didn't like about the police business was the hard feelings. Do you know he often said he felt sorry for the fellow he had to arrest? John was like that. George Lewis's eyes were glistening now, but there were no tears, only a slight tremor in his words, a quiver around his chin. He said, Maybe you wouldn't want to publish this in the papers, but last Friday they had a funeral for Mr. Rhodes, Reverend A.H. Rhodes, in Point Edward. He was a fine minister, and John liked him. Well, after those fellows shot him, they took him to the hospital, and his wife got there. My boy John said, I guess I'll soon be with Mr. Rhodes. That was all he said. John was brave, and John was manly. He stood pretty near 6 foot. Yes, sir. I was always proud of my boys. There's Goldwyn and Clarence, too. Constable burned while aiding woman. Constable Jack Lewis of the Sarnia Police Force is nursing a slight injury to his face as the result of a fire that broke out in the millinery store of Mrs. Edith Rayner. Mrs. Rayner ran into the store during the fire to get her purse and empty the cash register, not knowing police had already saved her money. She was in danger from the fire when Constable Lewis dashed in and brought her out at the expense of a facial injury. Damage from the fire was estimated at $1,000, mostly to the stock. In memoriam. With keenest sorrow, we record the tragic death of a member of the Sarnia Police Force, George Edward John Lewis, in his 33rd year, who died by the hand of a cowardly criminal when together with Sergeant George Smith, Detective Frank McGurr, and Traffic Officer William Simpkins, he answered the call of duty during the daring attempt to rob the liquor store in the city. Constable John Lewis was sworn in as an officer on April 1st, 1929. On December 30th of his first year in the service, he was commended by the Police Commission for his smart work in causing the arrest of a man later convicted of theft. On October 20th, 1932, he was granted a merit mark for the Police Commission for arresting single-handedly 2 men whom he found in the act of breaking into the M&P store on Maxwell Street. He acted as patrol sergeant on different occasions when the services of a fearless officer was required. He was at all times quiet and unassuming, often showing sympathy for those whose arrest he had made, usually expressing his conscientious thoughts that simply, "I don't like to do this." On the witness stand, he was most fair, careful not to exaggerate, and rather than create a false impression, would give his prisoner the benefit of the doubt. He was held in great esteem by his fellow officers, and all those who came in contact with him in the pursuance of his duties. Never boastful, but dangerous in an emergency. The tragedy which claimed his life is deeply regrettable, and his absence creates an irreplaceable loss to his family and to the citizens of Sarnia. Written by William Lannon, Chief